Welcome back, all the viewers from the State of Affairs podcast. Uh, Today, we'll be talking about one of the interesting topics of international global geopolitics. That's about the Arctic geopolitical landscape and the great power rivalry over there. And we'll be talking about much more actually, since this is a new area for me, and I am too much honored and privileged that I have got with me a very young student who is just about to complete her bachelor's, I reckon. And then she has already been working. She has completed her internship with the Center for Policy Research, if I properly remember that. She can correct me on that. But first
Center for
things,
Public Policy Research.
is the Center for Policy Research?
Yes, there is one in Delhi, and that is Center for Policy Research, and this one is in Kerala, Cochin, Center for Public Policy
Okay,
Research.
that's wonderful. So I have got through your papers that you have written down. They are absolutely well articulated, well argued, and it seriously gave me enough information to actually prepare for this podcast. So I have got with me Meghna. Welcome to the podcast, Meghna.
Thank you so much, State of Affairs and Mehraj, for having me and giving me this opportunity to talk on one of the highly relevant topics of today, which is like the Arctic geopolitics. So I think there's a lot to explore and interact on this.
Most of the people do just keep telling me that where do I get all these scholars, but I seriously failed to answer to them that I have no big contacts and across the educational setup that we have. I am just a person who is learning and relearning about global geopolitics myself. So all along this, I come across people through different mediums, and we just interact and we agree upon certain things that we'll be able to conduct a podcast, and it's nothing beyond that. So that's an honest confession. uh,
Okay.
about
I get
about
it. I
about
totally understand that
about the
because
podcast, I'll say that we'll be talking about, see, let's draw a landscape for the viewers and for all the
sure.
people who will be just watching this podcast, is that about the Arctic Circle, you have to just draw us a landscape. But first we can talk about is the entire Arctic geopolitical thing is about that three important basic things. The resource exploitation, natural resources that are in abundance there. And the second thing is that it's detrimental for the climate, for its climatic impact and for its environmental security of the world. And the third thing is that we'll be talking about the military outpost that has been the main competition between Russia, US, and China. And across
Okay.
all these 3 points, we'll be also talking about some other stuff if we get time. So I'll leave it for the Meghna to actually open it up for us and draw us a landscape briefly about it.
Yes. So I would like to start uh, this interactive session with one of the biggest misconceptions that is present in across academia about the Arctic region, and that is this idea that the whole of Arctic Circle, the whole of Arctic region, is actually covered with ice sheets and ice glaciers. It's very difficult to navigate across the Arctic region. I mean, this idea is, you know, in certain ways, I would say it is incorrect because uh, if you look at the Arctic region, like if you look at it on the map, you have different types of Arctic. Like you have the Arctic, which comes under the Greenland. Then you have the Canadian Arctic, which comes under the jurisdiction of Canadian government. Then the Alaskan Arctic, which is again under US. And then you have the Scandinavian Arctic. And then again you have the Russian Arctic. So each Arctic geographical territory is different from the other. So as a whole, if you look at the Arctic region, the geographical nature or the territory, it's very vast, diverse, and very heterogeneous across the region, across the Arctic region. So when you have that different geographical nature in itself, in some areas it will be like if you look at the Scandinavian side, Scandinavian Arctic, it is icy waters, but it's very easy for ships to navigate across these icy waters. But if you look at the Greenland or the Canadian Arctic, it is completely filled with ice sheets and ice glaciers. But it is heterogeneous, like each Arctic differs from the other. So that is one of the misconceptions that is there about Arctic. And another misconception is that we should stop thinking about Arctic as a region just filled with ice, or just filled with polar bears or
Meghna,
walruses.
is
I think
everything okay with your
Arctic as a
network?
whole is much beyond that.
Is everything okay with your network? I guess your entire video has gone, it has just paused. So you were talking about, before we lost the connection, you were talking about the different dimensions of how we understand the different Arctics. So you can just proceed from that, from there.
Okay, so as I spoke about the misconception that is present about Arctic, the second misconception that everyone has about Arctic is it is just a land of ice and polar bears and walruses, and there's nothing beyond that. That is also a wrong assumption that is present in academia about Arctic, because as we can see, research has shown that there is a huge resource wealth that lies beneath these ice sheets or beneath these waters of Arctic. And again, Russia has been constantly looking out, and not just Russia, Maharaj. I think India, China, the European states, US, Canada, I think there are a lot of states that are involved in Arctic. And every country you can see, be it the Arctic Council nations or be it the observers in the Arctic Council, I think every country has a stake, every country has an interest, primarily because it has that value, that economic resources, economic strength. Arctic has it, undoubtedly. So that is, I think these are one of the this is one of the major reasons why there is a lot of geopolitical competition. I think one of the reasons why there is intense geopolitical competition existing over Arctic, in order to grab those resources, in order to, get a hand over that economic wealth. So that is the most important crux of Arctic geopolitics, the resource exploration, untapping the resources, untapping the unexplored wealth that is there beneath the Arctic.
So largely, if I can sum it up, is that there is a unique polar geography that Arctic has. So that's why it's important. There is also high sensitivity. It has high sensitivity to the climate change. That's why it's important. It's a leading indicator for environmental security studies. That's why it's important. And basically, we are talking here about the geopolitical part of it. That's if we can we just chalk out this competition or the power rivalry between China, Russia, and US. Can you extrapolate on that a bit more?
Yes, I think Russia, as we know it, Russia shares, in fact, Russia's western border, if you see, it almost 50 to 55% of the Russian border lies with the Arctic region. Almost 55%. So the rest, is divided between Nordic states and and Canada and USA. So 50, almost more than half of the Arctic region lies with Russia, under Russian jurisdiction, and hence the Russian, you know, and hence Russia has an upper hand over this region. So that's nothing to be surprised about it. Geographically, if you see, it's 55%. It's not a small number. It's all more than half. So definitely Russia has an upper hand over this region. 55% of Russian borderline with Arctic implies much of the untapped resources, or much of the untapped resource wealth, economic wealth, lies with the Arctic region, lies with the Russian government. So that itself gives a greater, that is an indication of an up, a Russian upper hand in the region, Russian upper hand in the region. And then you have the US state of Alaska, which is like the northernmost state lying with Arctic. And then you have India and China, which is like two emerging players. So one of the interesting aspects when you look at the Arctic politics, when one of the interesting aspects is that in 2018, China released a paper which said that it itself, China is a near Arctic state. China considers itself to be a near Arctic state. Imagine Russia is, Imagine China is thousands of miles away from the Arctic region. It doesn't have any geographical proximity with Arctic. Be it any Scandinavian nation, be it US or Canada, it doesn't share any geographical proximity with these countries or even with the region as a whole. But the ambitious nature of the Chinese leaders, the Chinese government, that has made them declare itself to be a near Arctic state. And then you have the Polar Silk Route, which is like another ambitious plan of the Chinese government to expand its economic infrastructure, economic facilities, military infrastructure across the Arctic region. So that is the vision China has. Then you have Indians on the other side. India very recently into the this year, like early this year in Feb and March, they released a policy called the New Arctic Policy, which is like a very brief document talking about how they want to explore the Arctic, but in a very subtle way, I would say. They are talking about how they could, how Indian government could be involved in building up research facilities, how they could be involved in progressing sustainable development across the region, and there are lots of things that are very subtly spoken about in the field of IR. But underneath, if you introspect the whole document, I think there are interests outlined for New Delhi in this region, and those interests are very specific. Like for example, there was and there was a shipment which was made 2 3 years ago from the Arctic region. That was the LNG gas. It was a shipment from the Russian Arctic to India in 2018. So Russia is definitely going ahead with its exploration programs in Arctic region, and Russia and India. If we could see its, that depth in the friendship even during the Ukraine crisis, there were a lot of instances of India abstaining from many resolutions which were passed against the Russian interest. So even amidst this crisis, there is a lot of cooperation that is existing between Russia and India. And in the future also, I think it's going to be more or less the same. I think Russia has their interest in India, and India needs that uh, support infrastructure to keep up with its own national interest. So India is acting. I think India is acting like any other real estate would do. It has its own interests outlined. It is going to go to an extent to get its interest sorted. So I think the same thing functions with Arctic also. Russia already has its research base in Norway. India has its research base already in Norway, and there are agreements signed between Russian agencies and Indian government to cooperate on exploration of minerals, exploration of gas, and other economic wealth that Arctic can offer. So all these instances, imply that there is enhanced cooperation between India and Russia, and Russia also has its interest and stakes. China has its vision of expanding itself and gaining those benefits by investing in Arctic. And as a consequence of all this, there is a possibility of India China conflict as well, because I think these interests will always differ. I think their interests are always opposite.
Oh,
So there is always a possibility
that
of.
having been said, if I can just sum it up, is that uh, in the great game of geopolitics, big powers like Russia, US, China, and India, they are the main contestants. Apart from all the Arctic Council members and its observers, observer states, uh, we cannot just take the discussion towards that because it will be too lengthy. But cutting short, long story is that what is the the main thing that actually provoked me and prompted me to have this podcast was from the environmental perspective. And what do you have to say about that? I mean, are we looking at the great environmental doctrine that will, or regime that will come out of it, if the countries they just collaborate and they just cooperate on certain basic issues, because it's going to be detrimental for the entire surface Earth, climate wise, environmental wise. So, what's your take on that? Can you briefly sum it up?
Mehraj, how I see it is like, as I said, the stakes are very high and the stakes are very interesting as well. And the stakes are economically very beneficial. But if there are opportunities arising from this region, simultaneously there will be consequences as well. So if the opportunity is like uh, free flowing waters, free navigation, uh, more beneficial, more economic benefits to the communities living in in this region who are dependent on this region. If they even if they get more benefits, more economic benefits and incentives, I think the consequences of it will be rising seawater levels. You know, in communities getting endangered, the flora and fauna getting again spoiled or endangered. So these are the ultimate consequences of any geopolitical or geoeconomic competition. I think it's just not specific to Arctic, like be it any region. I think once there is a geopolitical interest over there or geoeconomic interest over there, the consequences will be more or less the same. And Arctic being one of the biggest crux points of climate change, I think the consequences will be even more intense. And even if there is like a one minor consequence, I think it can intensify, it can lead to a bigger conflict after that. So climate change is something that is very prominent when it comes to the Arctic region. You just can't get away with it. No other country, because if you see geographically, once there is a tipping point in the Arctic region, the whole of northern Europe gets affected, Russia gets affected, Canada, USA, uh, every country associated with this region will get affected. So that's like not a simple thing. Like the after effects of it, or the spillover effects can be even more harmful or dangerous. So, considering the climate change, now Arctic Council, many of the nations in the Arctic Council have actually suspended their participation over Russian assault over Ukraine. So, Arctic Council was one of those councils which adopted a peaceful approach to solving problems or threats that the Arctic faced. So now the nations have only suspended their, countries have only suspended their participation, which means now it is not about peaceful approaches or subtle approaches. It is about intense competition, conflict that will unfold in the Arctic region.
So there are, if I rightly comprehend what you say, is that there are points of escalation. It's going to be the new great game in the geopolitics after Indo-Pacific, or for that matter, after the South China Sea, scramble. And there has been, there are analysts who actually say that it's for the sea lanes, the new sea routes that countries will be,
Yes,
competing for, and also for the great natural resources that are lying on the seabed,
yes,
and also into the entire ocean. And the more escalating points will be that since the ice caps will just shrink and they will just melt down, there will be more unmanned land, and there will be more borderless land that will be claimed by the competing nations and the states, and especially the big powers. So there are chances of escalation, there are chances of conflict. And what do you see for Arctic Council? Will it be a platform where it will act as a mechanism and a stimulant for initiating peace process amongst the countries, because it has serious and dire consequences for the entire planet Earth?
yes, yes, absolutely. As far as the future of Arctic Council is concerned, uh, I think the nations must get back to cooperating. there was cooperation for some good period of time. I think from the time it started, like from the time the organization got into working till until recently, till the Russian assault, I think there was a good period of time which witnessed cooperation and interaction among the states. But now, with the nations, with the countries itself backing out from Arctic Council, or sort of not giving it that attention that it needs, because every country is now concentrating on the Russian Ukraine crisis. So there is a slight diversion. I wouldn't say much, but there is a slight diversion that the Arctic Council now faces. That is, most of these countries that have stakes in the Russian Ukraine crisis is again, sort of a little bit diverged from the Arctic crisis. But I think they should get back into working. I really feel they should get back into working, because if not geopolitical competition, they have another challenge, which is the climate change. So either way, they must cooperate. Like, they should not just let go of Russian, the Russian involvement. They just shouldn't let go of the climate change, be it any aspect, be it a geopolitical competition or a rivalry, or be it climate change. They have challenge. They really have challenges ahead when it comes to Arctic region. So they must get back into cooperating, and nothing than I mean, there's no other option than cooperating, like, really.
Are there, I mean, I'm running out of the time, but as last comment I'll ask from you is that, are there some big things that we have to keep in mind when we look at the entire narrative that will be spun around this Arctic geopolitics? What are the big things that we'll be looking at in the next decade or so?
I think, uh, with as I said, China has its ambition. Like, if you look at the country-wise, narrative, I think China has its ambition and vision outlined. Like, it is very specific. So China will definitely try to meddle its hands over the region, undoubtedly, in the future. India will definitely, look after its interest, go ahead with proceed with its interest by cooperating with Russia, and by cooperating with other countries as well. So India has good relations with the Nordic states as well, besides Russia. So definitely it will proceed with its interest. So the power play that we can see, and as I said, Russia is Russia is undoubtedly going to be there. Russia is omnipresent in that region. So definitely, power politics, gradually it will unfold in the region, but probably it might take some time. Like, now as I said, that Baltic states or Ukraine crisis is going on. Now to now there should be a trigger, either from the NATO side, or either from the Russian side, or from some other country. There should be a trigger. Once that trigger sets in the Arctic region, I think this will gradually become gradually become like what we saw in other states, like during the Cold War era, like Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan. Naturally, I mean, gradually it will become an area of competition and conflict.
You joined us. Thank you on the short notes. Since I'm running out of time, I'll just wrap it up. Meghna, we'll join you again some other day, and we'll have in-depth discussion again on this. Thank you for coming over to
Sure.
the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you, State of Affairs, and thank you,
Take care.
Manoj.
Take care.
Uh, have you stopped recording?